In flamenco research works, sometimes we find what we call catch-all drawers, or sentences that are used to conclude the study on a specific topic instead of investigating it more thoroughly. In episode 40 of the podcast Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco, we will review some of the most commonly used catch-all drawers and listen to very unknown flamenco music from the 19th century.
Sounds that once were listened. Sounds that once were enjoyed. Sounds that once were danced. Sounds relegated to oblivion. And yet, there is still something we can do for them. Let us summon them. Let us summon them.
Welcome to the podcast Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco. My name is José Miguel Hernández Jaramillo, and I invite you to enroll in this journey through the sounds, stories, spaces, and people that were part of the 19th century flamenco.
Hello, and many thanks to everyone listening to this new podcast episode as we celebrate a year and a half of our journey. Take advantage of the end of this episode, where I will give you some important news about an event we will have today in Madrid, which I would like to invite you to. Last week, I was invited as a speaker to the summer course Flamenco, Image of Spain and the World, organized by the Pablo de Olavide University in my homeland, Seville, and admirably directed by Ildefonso Vergara. By the way, from here, I reiterate my thanks to Ildefonso and the Pablo de Olavide Foundation for the invitation and the attention I received during my stay in Carmona. In the session that I was assigned to teach, we were reflecting on how much we still don't know about the early days of flamenco, and a good part of the blame for this lack of knowledge is how research on flamenco has developed historically, even today. I have already commented in other previous episodes on many aspects of flamenco historiography that need to be revised or even rewritten, and I would like to dedicate this episode to reflecting on a resource that flamencology uses frequently and that, in my opinion, should be avoided because of the damage it ends up causing. I am referring to what Lénica Reyes and I call catch-all drawers. Although the most common meaning of this expression is a set of diverse and disordered things, we use it more in the sense of that drawer or place where we put everything that we don't know where else to put, resulting in that conjunction of diverse and disordered things inside the drawer. In this sense, when a person who investigates flamenco and cannot explain a reality resorts to generic expressions that we call catch-all drawers to explain said reality. Therefore, the catch-all boxes are suitable for closing an investigation, for closing it, and thus justifying that it is not necessary, for the moment, to go deeper into it. An answer has already been given, even if it is as generic as it is usually poorly supported by evidence, documents, or analysis. It is like when we are missing a piece of the puzzle, and instead of looking for it carefully, we cut out a piece of cardboard, paint it with what we believe should be the original piece, and place it to finish the puzzle. These catch-all boxes can be used when proposing hypotheses as a starting point for undertaking a more in-depth investigation. What cannot be allowed is when it is used when issuing theories or categorical statements. Unfortunately, the word hypothesis is heard very little in flamenco texts, as well as in master's theses or even doctoral theses that address the study of flamenco. Let's look at some of the most recurrent miscellaneous phrases that are still heard very often, and we can start with the one that says that flamenco is an oral art. Therefore, it is impossible to know what flamenco music and singing were like before the appearance of phonographic recordings around 1895. This phrase or miscellaneous phrase is used when referring to flamenco music before this date. However, as I have already said in other episodes, we may not get to know the timbre or sonority of the singing before 1895. But that does not mean that we cannot know the melodies of flamenco songs or the guitar falsettos that were played. There was a lot of written documentation left, and according to the analyses that both Lénica Reyes and I have carried out, what was captured on paper is quite faithful to the music performed orally. I already spoke about this in depth in episode 6 of this podcast titled Can We Know Flamenco Before Recordings? If you haven't heard it, you can do so on the leading podcast platforms and the YouTube channel Sonidos Olvidados, Etnomusicologia Creativa. Related to this mess, we have another when it is stated that flamenco music is impossible to put on a staff. A score will never reflect an interpretation of someone singing flamenco, but this is not exclusive to flamenco singing, aside from any form. A score will reflect the music sung or played on the guitar. Of course, it is possible to capture it. In fact, scores have been documents of incalculable value in understanding the complex processes that occurred in the formation of flamenco. Flamenco is a very complex piece of music, but it is not exceptional. Like other complex music, it can somehow be reflected on paper. Before continuing, I will take a short break to listen to some unpublished flamenco music written on paper, as I usually do in this podcast. In this case, we're going back to the year 1874, and from the collection of scores entitled Cantos Españoles by the Málaga-born Eduardo Acam. We're listening to the piece entitled La Soledad. Another miscellaneous that has been used recently is not considering a flamenco piece from the 19th century as flamenco because it doesn't resemble some of the current palos, even if the work indicates that it is indeed considered flamenco. If the piece doesn't musically resemble the flamenco we know today, it is ruled out as part of flamenco, and therefore its investigation is shelved. This is very delicate because the flamenco of 130 or 140 years ago is not the same as the one we know today, so sometimes it's expected that it doesn't have such a close resemblance. However, this cannot justify not investigating it further. On the contrary, it should be an incentive to explore it more deeply to understand why it differs from what we currently know. The urgency and importance of this research cannot be overstated. Another of the miscellaneous that you will hear in conferences and writings on contemporary flamencology is to say that this or that dance was from the bolero school and not so much a flamenco dance. The term bolero school was coined well into the 20th century to distinguish specific dances that shared particular aesthetics, dance techniques, and choreographies from other dances, such as flamenco dances. I will not go into much depth now. Perhaps in the future, I will dedicate a complete episode to this topic, but I will tell you that this barrier between the dances called boleros and flamencos was not so marked in the 19th century. Therefore, it is not a justification to pigeonhole any dance or person who danced with this bolero school category and exclude it from research on flamenco. I'll give you an example. When the 1895 video of Carmencita, one of the earliest films ever made, was released, more than one or two people who researched flamenco said that she wasn't dancing flamenco, but rather the bolero school, and with that, they once again gave up on further research. When you do a thorough investigation into what dance it was, you come to the conclusion that it was indeed a flamenco dance, specifically the PTNera. Suppose you don't know about this research. In that case, I encourage you to listen to episode 17 of this podcast that I titled What Did Carmencita Dance?, where you'll learn all the details about it, and you can watch the video synchronized with the music of a PTNera from her time. Let's go through another of these miscellaneous ones. You've probably read or heard at some point that such and such comes from some zarzuela without ever mentioning which one. It is a resource used very frequently, and it is true that some palos could have originated from the popularity of several zarzuelas, which are Spanish lyric dramatic genre that alternates between spoken and sung scenes, as we saw that happened with the Guajira flamenco. But this must be investigated in depth and demonstrated, and not just stated lightly to get out of the way. Thorough research is crucial to understand the true origins of palos. So speaking of flamenco and zarzuela, we are going to listen to a very unknown zapateado included in the Zarzuela Café Teatro y Restaurant Cantante, which was subtitled in a very funny way as was customary at the time. It was composed by Cristobal Aldred in 1868. Perhaps the catch-all drawer that is highest in the ranking of catch-all drawers is used when it is said that Apollo comes from folklore. I will discuss this topic in depth in one of the next episodes of this podcast. Still, I will mention that the folklore category is so ambiguous and problematic that it is the perfect catch-all for everything that cannot, or rather, be investigated in more depth. Finally, another of the most used words is catch-all drawers, which means that a flamenco palo comes from some Baroque dance, such as the jacquera, and especially the fandango. It would seem that all flamenco is a derivative of the 18th century fandango when obviously it is not. But this resource is used without any embarrassment. I have even seen it in doctoral theses. If you follow this podcast regularly, indeed, you are aware of the complexity involved in the fact that something as wonderful as flamenco has reached our days, the infinite number of processes and transformations that the music and songs have undergone in all these decades since this art has been known as flamenco. Reducing these processes to saying that Apollo is the son or grandson of the fandango without providing solid arguments to support it is a practice that should be abandoned. On the contrary, we should investigate all these processes in depth, from the micro to the macro processes. I assure you that it does not take months but years or decades to clarify how these processes took place, and it's a testament to the depth and complexity of flamenco's history. This ambiguity calls for a need for clarity and precision in flamenco research, highlighting the necessity and value of your work as a listener and researcher in this field. As we've seen, the quality of these resources on flamenco research can be questionable. It's crucial to exercise critical thinking when encountering such information. Consider whether the claims are well supported or if they're being swept under the rug. Let's strive to keep the discourse on flamenco research rigorous and transparent. Suppose you are in Madrid today. In that case, I invite you to the seminar Sound Fabrics of Ibero-America, the music that binds us together, in which I will participate with Reyes and 3 people who are visiting us from the Faculty of Music of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and we will talk about music, the sounds that we share in various countries of Latin America, and where there will be a lot of live music in which the flamenco singer José Miguel Moreno and my colleagues from the Son Jarocho Madrid Collective will collaborate. In the end, there will be a fandango jarocho or community party with music and dance, as in the Sotavento region in Veracruz in Mexico. It will be at 7 p.m. at the Espacio Luzeta in Madrid in the Lavapiés neighborhood, with free admission until total capacity. This event will be exciting, so don't miss it. I am eagerly looking forward to the seminar and the opportunity to share our passion for music with you. Whether you can join us today in Madrid at Espacio Luzeta, or tune in for the next episode of this podcast in 2 weeks, I am excited to continue our musical journey together.